So let's talk about the 488 Pista and how it compares to my Speciale. Obviously, I've watched almost every single video out there on the Pista and the Speciale, and I've noticed that no one really kind of compares both back to back, especially from an owner's perspective. So I was very curious. So I asked my friend who has a Pista if I could give it a spin just to see what I was missing or what was different. So first thing I notice, just looking around, is just how large the Pista feels. Now, the main thing making it feel larger than the Speciale is definitely the front bonnet and that S-duct. So, I'm sure you know about the S-duct. That's one of the defining features of the Pista, but the S-duct results in a very bulbous front fenders, and that's to channel the air, right? Which, you know, I can see very clearly at each corner of the front windshield, and this bulbousness is thicker and visually softer than the sharp front fenders that are on my Speciale. So it makes the car feel a little bit bigger than it really is. You know, most mid or rear engine cars have a huge benefit of having a very low, short, and sloping hood, which gives you excellent visibility of the road ahead, but those fenders just didn't give me that feeling. It's probably just a preference thing, but it was something I definitely noticed right away. Now, moving on to the interior of the cabin, it's very similar to my Speciale with the exception of the passenger air vent in the center of the car. I didn't like it. You know, the vent is kind of like, it's cut out of that dashboard, and it kind of breaks up the swooping lines that go along with the dashboard from the passenger side to the driver's side, and it just looks messy in my opinion, but, you know, obviously it's a personal preference. So, first off, the steering. Now, the steering wheel itself is the exact same as the Speciale, so no real change there, but I did notice that the steering feel, you know, it had a lot more heft and weight to the wheel, and it definitely helped reduce the quote-unquote twitchiness of the super fast steering rack that are on all these new modern Ferraris, and it helps with the feel through the corners. Now, the engine noise is nowhere near as loud as a Speciale, but it definitely had character with a nice and gradual pitch change as the revs rise. So unlike the Speciale, which has a constant pitch with the volume increasing with more revs, you know, and of course I am over exaggerating just a little because, you know, such a little pitch change when compared to with other V8s. And, you know, the Speciale is loud and obnoxious, and while it is cool, it just lacks a nice pitch change as the revs rise. So anyway, back to the Pista, you know, another thing I instantly noticed is that as we were transiting to our mountain pass, it just, you know, how much more controlled and soft the suspension is. You know, the characteristic bouncing of tightly sprung sports cars with heavy damping to control the bounce is gone in the Pista. It just glides over those bumps, and I even had the suspension in the non-bumpy road or the stiff setting, and, you know, I did hear from other car reviewers that the combination of high levels of mechanical grip and, you know, of course, Ferrari's next generation electronics, that the Pista can be more softly sprung without a huge penalty in pulling insane G-forces in the corners. So while the bouncing definitely looks cool, it will put a toll on your back on long drives. So the suspension softness definitely makes this car more comfortable, less busy, and easier to drive for long distances. And of course, that is especially when the setting for the suspension is in bumpy road mode. Now, as we begin climbing up the mountain pass and I start to play with the throttle a little, you know, I knew the Pista is very fast, but man, I got through some traffic, waited for a small little straightaway, and just mashed that throttle, and dear God, I mean, it is super fast. Now, the pull from 5,000 revs to 8,000 rev limiter is just insane. It turns my eyesight into practically tunnel vision, and the car just rockets forward with a velocity I just haven't felt before in a car. This coupled with the short gearing and the smooth and fast shifts from the dual clutch transmission definitely makes this car a weapon. Reflecting back at my F12, the F12 was fast, but the Pista actually makes the F12 feel like the engine had more inertia, with pretty much like a tractor pulling weights at the back of the car. The Pista is just a rocket ship, and when you match the throttle, the entire car feels weightless. Like there is no detectable weight or friction holding the car back. You can feel that torque management system limiting torque in each gear and only providing enough torque that the tires can handle. Flooring the F12 would just result in spinning the rear tires crazy, but the Pista just grips and it just goes. The torque management system also makes it feel very linear, where the power builds all the way to redline, just like a naturally aspirated car. Throttle response is very good, and while it may not be as hyper-reactive like the Speciale, you would be forgiven if you didn't know it was turbocharged. Of course, you would hear the turbo spool, but in terms of responsiveness, it is simply amazing. The slightest turbo lag is still present though, which does feel like a small gap of air compressing under your throttle pedal before the engine starts pulling, but it is really, really good for turbo engine, and I think at this point it's just a total moot point in my opinion. The transmission is also very interesting too. The upshifts are fast and smooth with no jerkiness at all. The Speciale has a hard slam to the gears during upshifts, but for the Pista they eliminated the slam, I believe, I'm assuming, to not upset the chassis during the shifts. Now, downshifts in the Pista is also crazy fast. It's just not just fast, but it's instantaneous and it's so smooth. The Speciale downshifting feels like it takes twice as long as the Pista, and the Speciale has a definite jerkiness as the engine has to jump up in revs to match the gear speed. I think it has something to do with the Pista's engine being from a 488 Challenge race car, that the inertia feels almost non-existent in the engine. It's just that responsive. The engine really is the star in the Pista, and I can't believe that this engine got put into the F8, which is a quote-unquote normal series production car. So the F8 must be the Pista in road car form, and could possibly be the bargain of the century if the F8 engine responds anything like the Pista. Midway through the hairpin, I start to accelerate, and then once I spot the exit, I start to increase throttle while decreasing steering angle, and then I just full throttle out, and wow. This thing is a track weapon. It's so controlled and composed through the hairpin, with the soft suspension absorbing any imperfections in the road surface to ensure that those imperfections don't upset the chassis. And as we slow down while approaching a red light, I start to reflect on what just happened here. And here's what I think is going on. I believe that they made the suspension softer, not only to just ensure that it doesn't upset the chassis, because the car already had insanely high levels of mechanical grip, but also because it will result in a more progressive breakaway point. The supple suspension gives me more information to how it is being loaded with G-forces, as well as communicating how much more grip was remaining before it would break free. In comparison, the Speciale is so stiff that I don't get a lot of information on when the car is at the limit of traction, which could result in a violent breakaway. Now, of course, this may be overdramatic, but when you compare it to the Pista's high level of feedback coming through the chassis and steering wheel, it definitely is. So I really believe that the Pista is softer for those reasons. High levels of mechanical grip, it absorbs imperfections to not upset the chassis, there's a better feel for suspension and tire loading, and of course, because it has better integration with advanced electronics, all working together to keep the car quick through the corners. So after that main drive, it was time to relax and reflect on other things as we drove back to town over a different mountain pass. And one thing I did notice was the sound in the cabin. While I know the cabin is stripped out, it just isn't as boomy in the cabin like the Speciale, nor are there as much other types of noises that come through like they do in the Speciale. And after thinking about it more, I think Ferrari specifically filtered out the noises that don't help you drive faster, but left in the noises that do help you drive faster as a feedback loop. Now let me explain this. The Scud and Speciale were already stripped out and made lighter from their already light normal versions, so the engineers just, removed anything they could get their hands on. But I have a sneaky suspicion that it was very easy to reduce the target goal of 90 kilograms of a weight reduction, which is the norm for the Ferrari, lightweight special editions. So the engineers went to work on removing all sound deadening that would enhance the feedback loops to drive faster, but also not remove things so they could filter out all the sounds that would cause driver fatigue. Now, it's really hard to explain, but the cabin lets in all the good noises, but filters out the boominess and other noises that would impact the driver's ability to focus. It is blatantly obvious that the engineers really worked hard on the Pista and did everything possible to make it faster on the track while also easier on the driver. It's actually kind of geeky, and I think it is this point to which I believe is the main difference between the Speciale and the Pista. Before the Pista, the special track versions of Ferrari's cars were always to increase driver involvement, excitement, and turn the car up to 11. And while their track times did improve, it was merely a byproduct of all those little small enhancements that hardcore driving enthusiasts wanted from a special version. But with the Pista, it feels like their main goal was to improve track times, with all of these increased driver involvement and excitement being merely a byproduct of that lap time. So their main goal, I feel, has switched. And while it isn't really an issue, it is a sign that these cars are now more geared towards insane lap times. But since a majority of these cars won't be used to eke out that last tenth of a second on the track, including me, then I think it will come down to enjoyment and excitement first, with better lap times being merely a byproduct and secondary. And if it comes down to enjoyment and excitement, then which is the more enjoyable and exciting car to drive? So imagine chariot racing for a second, and the Pista is the best horse that has been bred over many generations to be the fastest and most obedient to their drivers. That's the Pista. Now think of the Speciale as a wild horse that the driver is always struggling to keep under control, always on the raggedy edge, and despite the struggle, they miraculously finish the race without dying. Well, this is exactly how I see these two cars. They are both great cars, but each are built for a different purpose. So let us quiet the naturally aspirated Ferrari fanboy trolls and just appreciate that Ferrari has now created a very serious track time competitor to McLaren. AKA, let's shift the focus to McLaren fanboys. But anyway, talking now, just to round everything up, looking over to the appearances, this is the part that kind of polarizes me. I know appearance is very subjective, but I'm just having a difficult time liking how the Pista looks. I get all the aerodynamic reasons, but it just doesn't have a classy look like the cars before. Ferrari always likes to stay classy by avoiding large wings, but honestly, the Pista is a mess with all the aerodynamics flicks here and there, resulting in a jumbled mess. Now, with the shift in goals for the Pista being more about track times, they should have just put a huge wing on the back, put a huge front splitter in the front, and just keep a classic silhouette of the standard 458 and be done with it. But instead, the design is conflicted by trying to keep the traditional Ferrari classiness with maximum aerodynamic efficiency and downforce for quicker track times. And the biggest problem I have about the looks, though, are the S-duct and the air intakes behind the doors. The S-duct is smaller and way more classy on the F8. So why not go more that way? And regarding the air intakes, I am sure they were placed there for better airflow, but they just look out of place. It was like the 360 and the 430, and when they went to the 458, it became a classic look and design because it was just more classy with the intakes integrated in with that rear quarter glass. So in the end, I personally prefer the Speciale over the Pista, but you know, I've had many conversations with my friends before about trying to understand what's the point of a stripped out track version of these cars if they will only be, or at least if they will be majoritively driven on the street most of the time. I mean, isn't a dedicated non-road legal track car the better choice for lap times anyway? And we all came to the same conclusion, where the stripped out track versions made these cars more exciting to drive on the road than their normal versions. And isn't that the point? And that's where I kind of come up and sum everything up about the Speciale and the Pista. You know, the Pista is a great car. It's built for track times, but I think the main points that they're trying to get is just different. So it's just a different car. But for me personally, you know, my Speciale is going to be driven majority on the street, not the track. So I'd get the Speciale. It's more exciting to me. It may not be nowhere near as fast. And it just looks the part. Pista is fast on the track. But at that point, why not just get a non-road legal stripped out track car at that point? And that, I think that's where I'm conflicted. But who knows? We'll see what the next special version, hopefully Ferrari makes one of their F8, and we'll see what they do with that one. But I think that could be the one before they eventually go downsizing the V6 and hybrid powertrains. So that's my thoughts on it. Yeah, ask questions and be glad to answer. Thanks.